So today I decided to tell you a few things about how to use your full frame lenses on your APS-C cameras and if that's worth it or not. But today we're talking about Nikon because it forces us to use our full frame lenses on the APS-C bodies. Hey, what is good everyone, Chris here, welcome back to the channel. And like I said, today we're talking about Nikon Z system and how we're forced to use our full frame lenses on the APS-C bodies because Nikon still don't have a reliable APS-C system for lenses, and there are not many lenses in their lineup, so the best bet for you is to buy full frame lenses. Now for me it's easy, I'm using the Z6 II and the backup for it is my Nikon ZFC. And I love them both, but when it comes to lenses, I don't have much options, let's say professional options, to choose on my APS-C system. And I know that there are only two cameras, this one and the Z50, which are pretty much the same camera with different bodies. But Nikon, you should get into this and start building APS-C lenses specifically for the APS-C sensors that you're using in the Z cameras. Why is that? Well, first and foremost, I'm using three main lenses, the 24mm f1.8, the 85mm f1.8 and the 35mm f1.8 on the ZFC, and they're both doing very well in terms of image quality, in terms of colors, in terms of, let's say, handling. But sometimes I feel kinda forced to use different methods to hold my camera when it comes to big lenses like this 85mm f1.8, which is a pretty hefty lens in terms of an APS-C sensor. So that is cumbersome for a lot of photographers, especially if you're a travel photographer. If you are starting into photography right now and you're buying one of these, the only thing that you can get with it's the kit lens or the 28mm f2.8, I think, that they recently released, or at least recently on the market. But if you're shooting professionally with these cameras like I do from time to time and you wanna use other lenses, well, there are not many. There are a few zooms, I think 24 to 120 or something like that. Not many lenses that you can use on these cameras, and the aperture is not wide enough, especially for an APS-C sensor. So when I'm mounting all these full frame lenses on my APS-C, what I'm losing, what I'm gaining. First of all, I'm gaining focal length, which means I have to add a multiplier of 1.5 to the focal length of the lens that I'm using, and I'm talking about full frame lenses. Like this one, this is a 24mm f1.8. So on my APS-C camera, it's gonna be 35mm, 36mm, which means I'm getting a little bit more focal length. Now that can be beneficial if you're trying to get that focal length, if you need that focal length, but it can be a bit weird and cumbersome and a little bit constraining when you're shooting scenes that need a little bit more wider lens. So this 24mm is not gonna be enough, probably not even a 20mm. I would probably need to go with a 12mm, maybe a, I don't know, 16 at most. So that is a downside, gaining a little bit more focal length in some situations, but it can be beneficial if you need a little bit more tele and you want to be a little bit less closer to your subject when you're shooting events or any kind of things, street photography, and that is helpful. Now in terms of sharpness, you're losing a little bit, maybe a little bit more depending on how you're seeing stuff. I never was interested in sharpness that much until we got to mirrorless, where everything, like I said, it's clinically sharp. And now that I got used to it, when I don't have that sharpness in my images, it feels a bit weird. I'm cringing, something is wrong, maybe I did something wrong. Just to realize that these full frame lenses on the APS-C bodies are losing a little bit of sharpness, especially in the corners. Now the middle or the center of the image, it's still sharp, sometimes sharper than on full frame depending on the camera and depending on the lens obviously, but most of the time it's a little bit less, it's a bit softer. For me, for some situations, it's an amazing thing, shooting with the 85-1.8 and get a bit of a softer image, dreamy, that look nice. But sometimes, especially if I'm shooting, let's say, landscapes or product photography, that can be a little bit cumbersome. Now, the third one is the light gathering, and here is a huge debate. Some say that you should multiply the crop factor into the aperture, so that way you're finding out the exact aperture that you're shooting. Well, the light gathering is the same no matter what you're doing and what math you're doing. If you're shooting an 1.8 lens at 1.8, you're gonna have the same light gathering on APS-C and full frame, so that is great. Though another thing that people are debating, it's the bokeh, or the autofocus area behind your subject or in front of subject, which on APS-C obviously it's not that pronounced like it's on the full frame, and it's normal, it's a smaller sensor. And the bokeh, it's definitely not as smooth and as buttery, creamy smooth as on the full frame. That's why people say that the full frame is better. But again, the light gathering is the same. The only thing that you're losing is that creaminess behind your subject, that smoothness in autofocus, and it's not necessarily all the time depending on the lens that you're shooting. If you're choosing to shoot with an 85-1.8 or a 90mm or a 135 and you're getting close to the subject as close as possible, so you're framing it, let's say half body, you will probably have a pretty good bokeh behind the subject. But if you're shooting a full body shot and you're comparing it with a full frame camera, definitely it's gonna be different. It's gonna look different on a full frame. It's gonna look a bit more smooth behind and in front depending on the depth. So the depth of field, basically, it's better on a full frame. Now, in conclusion, should you buy a full frame lens for an APS-C camera? Well, if you are a Nikon shooter and if you bought the Z50 or the ZFC, you probably should, because you don't have much options, at least for now. Let's hope that this year is going to bring more options into the APS-C lineup for Nikon Z shooters. But for now, we don't have much options. If you have the option to buy an APS-C lens for an APS-C sensor, should you buy it or should you go for full frame? I say it depends. I would say that if you are one of those guys who are looking for sharpness and perfection in their photos, maybe you should go with an APS-C lens, because that will render the sensor the way it was built to, and you're gonna have more sharpness and everything is gonna look better on, let's say, on native APS-C to APS-C, as well as a full frame to full frame. But if you are thinking of moving towards full frame, if you have in mind that you're gonna hold on the APS-C until you learn the basics and then you're gonna buy a full frame camera, I would strongly advise you to buy a full frame lens or 2 or 3 and build up that system, because it's not cheap. And when you're gonna buy the body that costs you at least $2,000, you will feel that into your pocket, and you won't have much to invest in lenses. And that is not a good thing. Plus, if you only have APS-C lenses, you will probably need to sell those and buy full frame lenses. And these guys are more expensive than the APS-C counterparts, because they're built different, because they have more glass or bigger glass, and there are downsides to that too. They're heavier, they're heftier, and they don't always balance well on the camera. Now, I got used to this 85-1.8, let's say, on my ZFC, but it's not a very comfortable lens to shoot. So if you are a APS-C shooter and you have the option to buy APS-C lenses for your system, go ahead and do it. If you are an APS-C shooter now and you're thinking about buying into full frame in the future, think about that, and maybe you should either spice up your APS-C lineup with full frame lenses or buy only full frame lenses if it's in the near future, and avoid losing some money when you're selling the APS-C lenses. Guys, this is pretty much it. I hope it was helpful, and I hope you understood the situation with the APS-C and full frame lenses. If you want me to do a video reverted or inverted with the APS-C lenses on the full frame bodies, I can do that too. And let me know in the comments below. Also, let me know if you have any questions. Let me know why you're shooting and how that adapts to your style. And stay focused, my friends. I will definitely see you in a bit. take the cap off, you can definitely see what you're shooting. That's why I love rangefinders.